Hey everybody, this is Jason over at Paydirt DFS. I am joined with Alicia, also of Paydirt DFS. Today we're going to be discussing Week 1 NFL DFS and really going through how we use the tools here at Paydirt to really make informed decisions in order to produce lineups for some small field and single entry contests. So, Alicia, first off, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm excited to finally talk football. It's been a very, very good MLB season, and I'm ready for Sundays. I don't know about you, but from 1 o'clock to 8 p.m. EST, I don't want to be bothered. I just want to watch games, and I'm excited. I can't wait.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this all year. I would say almost as much as pumpkin spice lattes, but I don't drink those. So football is my thing.
I hear you on that. I hear you. I'm not a pumpkin spice person myself, so I'm with you on that for sure.
So yeah, let's get started. So I've DFS wise, I've been doing DFS for about 10 years. And one of the things that was interesting that really kind of drew me to the Paydirt community was the fact that there was an actual community there. I saw James out there giving ideas on how to actually understand the data and to, as opposed to just giving out data, he was kind of digging into like, here's how to use this data. Here's how to manipulate this data to make it work for you in the use cases that you're kind of building for. And, that's really what drew me into this space and to this community in particular. And then the fact that we can kind of partner together and talk to each other about, how we're building things, what we're doing. And then I think we'll dig a little bit into that today too. But I'd love to hear your start.
Yeah, I'm with you the same exact way. So I actually been playing DFS for what is it, 2024? I've been playing for probably about 7 years now. I started off with the old grinders are going to know this. I started off as a fantasy guru elite guy with like Tommy G and all those people. Man, what a wild ride. But when Jeff Collins, who was also at Fantasy Guru, started Number Ball, I followed him there, and that's actually where I got introduced to James. James started doing content for them. He was doing MLB, and the reason why I really, really was, I guess you could say attracted to James's style and what he does is he always wants you to, he was really big on teaching you how to find the best plays besides rather just giving them to you. And I think that's what really separates him from a lot of the DFS industry. He wants to make you a better player. He doesn't want to make you a, good person at picking picks from an article, right? And when he started Paydirt, I've been here since day one, and yeah, he's really helped level up my game a ton. I've been blessed to have a very, very good MLB season this year. Last year, I qualified twice for the FanDuel Live Finals. The past 2 years, NBA, I took down, some really big contests last year, and even this year, I've had a lot of success. And yeah, I went from somebody who was trying to figure it out every single day, and I'm dumping, million maker lineups in every Sunday, thinking I'm going to hit big, to I've been fortunate enough to cut a W-2 now the last few years, and I owe it all to James, right? Like just the community itself. We're always in there chatting, talking strategy. It's the best place to be, and I'm going to be with the guy for life. It's unmatched in the industry. I haven't seen anything better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely resonates with, James really having people kind of dig into the why and understanding the why and not giving you the why. You coming to him with, here's why I did this. Here's what that looks like. And then he may come back and question, but he's not giving you, here's how I'm build like this or else.
100%, and not to give too much away the secret sauce, but on top of all of that and the understanding, his models are also vastly different than a lot of the ones in the industry. He tries to capture trends that maybe people won't really see, and just that alone gives you more of an edge. But he does a really good job at helping you decipher through the data, and how everybody interprets it differently. And I'm just really thankful for him, and I'm really excited for the tools we have on tap now for NFL. We have some revamped contest sims that are going to be massive. We have the research sheets. I don't believe they're up right now, but that's okay. When we have our show later in the week, we'll touch on the research sheets that shows game totals like passing touchdown expectations, rushing touchdown expectations. His range of outcomes, in my opinion, are really unmatched. And then some of his other tools that we'll go over. His betting market tools that show you more game totals, where you can find an edge. Pivot Finder, where you can find a pivot off of a certain player in a salary range, and his Stack Finder, which I think is really, really imperative. Helps you find the most valuable stacks at their ownership. So he's got some great tools, and I'm excited to dive through them and hopefully find some winners for this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of diving into things, I'd love to kind of dive into what it looks like when you're building out single entry lineups for, let's say, the Spy or $50 contests for NFL, and what tools you use from Paydirt specifically.
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen just so everybody can take a look. Hold on one second. So the first thing that I like to do is when I'm starting to build for small field single entry, I want to take a look at this tab here. This is this team stacks range of outcomes. You could sort these by any which way you want. You could sort them by team total here. You could sort them by salary. You could sort them by floor, median, ceiling, a top finish, a top 5 finish, a top 10 finish, a 60 plus percentage, which means how often that stack collectively will score 60 points or more. You have a 2x, meaning how often they double their salary in fantasy points, 3x, 4x ownership, and then a leverage score. When I'm looking here, the number one thing that I want to think about, Alicia, when I'm building single entry small field slates is I want to find the most valuable stacks I can at the best projections. Here's why I say it that way. When I look at these and I sort by, 60 plus percentage here, you'll see right away Miami is first, Minnesota is second, Cincinnati is third, followed by Houston, Arizona, Dallas, so on and so forth. I'm really trying to keep together, keep in mind the cost associated with these stacks. So if you see here, like, the Miami stack, while that pops as the number one stack to most likely eclipse that 60-point threshold, Minnesota's second. And I think most people coming into week one are not thinking about stacking Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson. And there's also Joe Burrow. There's Houston, with CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray. So I look at this and I want to get a feel for who is most likely to beat that threshold. The second thing I look at is I also want to look at the top 5 finish here as well. And this is going to show also which stacks, and it's going to be pretty much in lockstep with that 20 percentile, but you'll see which stacks are most likely to finish as a top 5 stack. And to be clear, these are all combinations, and these are double stacks. We'll go into more of like, should you double stack, should you not, and we'll break that down in a minute. But overall, you're getting a gist of which stacks projected the most. Lastly, the one thing I like to look at is a 3x percentage. A 3x percentage is usually going to show you from a dollar amount of what is the most cost-effective stacks. Not saying they're great, not saying you should play them, but if there is a little bit of a crossover, you should really consider them. Like, for instance, this is sorted by 3x right now. You have this Jacksonville stack right here. Trevor Lawrence, Kirk, Brian Thomas has a ceiling of 76.49 and a cost of only 16,400 as a stack. That's pretty good. You have a Sam Darnold stack here with Jordan Addison. And when you sort by ceiling again, you'll see that stack for Trevor Lawrence is a top 10 stack overall in regards to ceiling. So you get an idea for that. But we know by looking at these stacks just right off the rip, Miami's projected really well, Cincinnati, Minnesota, Houston, Arizona, and then there's Buffalo, Dallas, and Jacksonville. Those are probably the teams that offhand you're like, all right, maybe that's where I'm going to start. So any questions on that before I move to individual players?
Yeah, I guess how often do you use the LevX, and where does that kind of come into play?
So I use the LevX fairly often, but the one thing with LevX is that I really want to be careful of how I value it. What I mean by that is I want to make sure that if I have a highly leveraged stack, that I have the right higher owned, well projected plays around it. And also too, leverage is not always created equal, even though it will have that score. So sort of by leverage here, you see that the Dak stack with CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks with only a team total of 19.75, and they're a little bit more expensive at 21,400. They have the most leverage because it's going to be that low owned. But conversely, Carolina, who is showing as the second highest leverage stack, 18.25, very, very cheap. The ceiling is right around there with Dallas. Ultimately, if you're making me make a decision on who I'd want to start with, I probably would start with the cheaper stack if I wanted to just go something very low owned. But for the purpose of single entry, you don't really want to do this because, as you could tell, and I think everybody knows, Dallas is a more high potent offense than Carolina is, right? Like that. Everybody knows that. So I only want to look at this when I look at it more for mass multi-entering. But if look at it too with a one line of sample, it's just we got to have the right chalk around it to lower our volatility.
Perfect.
So in the range of outcomes, we have these overall range of outcomes tab here. We have quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. This overall range of outcomes is very interesting because this will show you where the value is on the slate at each, and honestly, by position. Here's what I mean. Obviously, you'll see that quarterbacks have a very high ceiling, high median. We actually have these filters down here of specific positions where I can go and I can isolate positions that I want to see in here. And I always keep this tab open like this because it will help me find somebody at a dollar amount if I need to fill in my flex. If I need a running back, that's where I'll go and look. So we have it now with just wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. When I'm looking at everything in totality, not just position by position, you'll see these tabs like the top finish, top 5, top 10. I don't really concern myself with that as much just because I'm more concerned about where they show up against other people in their position. So when I look at these columns, you have a 2x column, which in my opinion is a little bit more valuable for running backs than it is wide receivers because, if you have a 4K wide receiver and they go 5 for 50 and a touchdown, they completely surpassed it, right? So I don't concern myself much with this outside of running backs. The 3X, though, is one where I want to see where the value is. So first and foremost, you'll see Rome Odunze, salary at $4,000, median's almost 3X his salary, decent ceiling there is almost 6X his salary. He's got the highest chance out of anybody on the slate to 3X his salary. Right away, I'm probably writing down that Rome Odunze is a value wide receiver I want to look at. Then after that, there's Theo Johnson. He's the bare minimum at tight end. So maybe there's some red zone goodness here. Maybe that's why he's projected well. But overall, when we go into position by position, we'll see if that's smoke and mirrors or if that's legitimate. Then you start to see you have players with some respectable salaries kind of their names are showing up, like Drake London, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Malik Neighbors. So right away, if I'm just giving this a quick first glance, and if you're building, you definitely want to, go with a fine-tooth comb and go through all these. This is essentially telling me that I should probably prioritize mid-range wide receivers as a value point, or even cheap as a value point. I'm not saying you shouldn't play the Tyreek Hills and the Justin Jeffersons of the world. I think you still need those people. But overall, if I'm building out my lineup this week, I'm keeping in mind that value wide receivers are probably at a premium. And even as you go a little bit further, you'll see Brian Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, Thielen, Tank Dell. They're all wide receivers, right? Like we haven't even seen a running back yet. You have Bijan here. But so all in all, the value is really at spending down or mid-range at wide receiver. So does that make sense?
That makes sense. Is there a number you would filter down at, kind of stop at, in regards to the floor, the median, the ceiling, the top 10 finish, the 2%? Is there somewhere on this list where you would say no one under this area, essentially?
It's a good question. In short, the answer is yes, but only when we go to individual players. And I'll demonstrate more of that why. Just because if I'm comparing apples to apples, I can't compare in a vacuum a 4K Rome Odunze to a 2,500 Theo Johnson at a different position.
Right.
I can't really do that. What I do look for here, though, where I maybe start saying all right, maybe you're not as much of a value. It's actually kind of simple. I go through, and then when I get to a point where I see somebody's median is not at least 2x their salary, I start to think, okay, maybe you're not as much of a value anymore. So a really good example is, you see Curtis Samuel right here?
Mm-hmm.
He's right on the cusp of it. And his 3x is reflected. You could also use 2x percentage for this, but running backs are going to show up a little bit more than not. If you have a 5K running back, he has to fall in the end zone with 30, 40 yards to really get to where he needs to get to. But I'll demonstrate this a little bit more clear when we go position by position.
Okay.
So with quarterbacks now. So quarterbacks are very interesting. When we are going and looking at these quarterbacks, and as you can see here, I have this sorted. I just finished a quarterback article for Paydirt. It's going to be coming out tomorrow. We have these filters down here where you can view certain price ranges. So let me just turn that all the way back up so that way we get every quarterback on the slate. Perfect. So right now, looking at this, you'll see that when we sort by median projection, Josh Allen is the highest projected quarterback, followed by Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, Tua, so on and so forth. When I'm looking at quarterbacks, the number one thing that I'm really concerned with on this page, honestly, is their ownership, number one, two, their salary, and three, their 20+ percentage. The reason why I'm not as concerned about the 2x, 3x, and 4x here, maybe compared to some other players, is that the quarterbacks, while some of them, do have the ability to run and obtain yardage and get in the end zone themselves, they're very dependent upon their pass catchers. Football is a very correlative game. You want to correlate your pass catchers with your quarterbacks, so your price has to be very important, and you have to really consider that. If you have a guy who can do it with his legs and can do it with his arm, that's ideal. So the first thing that I'm going to look at first is, let's take a look at salary. So you see Josh Allen is the most expensive quarterback, followed by CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Tua, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, all the way down. You see that Josh Allen has a very high ceiling here. His median is a little under 3x his salary. He's a very good value even at his salary, but you're going to be paying for it. This is going to be the highest owned quarterback of the week. And the number one thing you want to consider when you're looking at ownership of individual players in NFL DFS, the contests are so massive, even the single entry ones, that you probably want to maybe add 8 to 10 to this in your head, right around there, just to be safe. So Josh Allen, at the highest, salary range is still a great value, followed by CJ Stroud, who, looks decent. Dak Prescott, you're wondering, like, okay, Dak at 7,100 does not look like a great value. Then you have Tua Tagovailoa, who's kind of, I guess similar to Stroud. He's got a little, same 2x as Stroud. He's got a little bit of a higher 3x, but he's got the same ownership. You go down to Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is an identical play to Tua, so in a vacuum, you're already thinking, like, if I'm going to use Cincinnati, I might prefer Cincinnati stacked to Miami. And then you get to Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray are just screaming values here. The fact that Anthony Richardson is $1,700 less than Josh Allen, but his median's about 2.5 points less. Kyler Murray is a higher projected quarterback than 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks more expensive than him. Already a screaming value. Trevor Lawrence, also of screaming value. So you look at this, 6,200, 18.58, 32.69 ceiling. Or I'm looking at these three right here as supreme values. So in the first two tiers, we identified Josh Allen's a supreme value. Stroud's decent. Tua's decent. Burrow's decent. Murray, Richardson, and Lawrence are supreme values. And then as we go a little lower, Kirk Cousins projects as a decent value at 6,100, but for 200, 300, 400 more, should you even go there? Probably not. Deshaun Watson, cheaper, but not projected better. Should you go there? Probably not. If you ever have a question about these quarterbacks too, when you go back to the team range of outcome stack, you could sort by team and you'll see the team's team totals here. So Cleveland has a team total of 22.75. Jacksonville has one to 23.25. So for that slight difference in salary, it's not, and in projection, it's not worth really making a leap, especially because you're talking about 5% owned versus, 5.5% owned versus 3.5% owned. You're not gaining much there.
How much does ownership matter in single entry contests? And are there certain tiers of quarterbacks and players you should stay away from based on the ownership to ensure that you're unique?
So not really. At the quarterback position, I don't think it's a place where you really need to worry so much about ownership because chances are you're stacking with them. So for me, it's more about like who you're putting around the stack. And you could have a contrarian stack, but in football, unlike any other, I guess you could say any other sport, with football, it, the stack itself is going to make up a bulk majority of your points. So I don't really care how low owned or under owned my stack is. If it projects well, I want to consider it. Just because everything you put around it can then be your pivots. Going down the rest of this, you'll see when you start going into the cheaper tier below 6K, Caleb Williams, supreme value. Jaden Daniels, supreme value. Geno Smith, pretty good value, yeah, at 5,500. Daniel Jones, decent value. And now you start getting into these quarterbacks that are just projected, as good values because they're super cheap. So Sam Darnold, a good value too. But all in all, if I had to highlight the best values I see, and this is going to be important when we go to the optimizer, for me, it's Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Sam Darnold. Those are the quarterbacks that I would like to isolate. Now I want to look at running backs. Running backs are a little bit different in how you should be viewing them. The way that running backs should be viewed are similar to how pitchers are viewed in baseball. They are the floor of your lineup. If there's usually a very, very good projected running back chalk play, Alicia, I'm probably most likely going to eat it if I cannot find a pivot. I'm most likely just going to eat it. The way that I view this here is, first off, I want to look at the 20+ percentage at which running backs are most likely to eclipse 20 or more fantasy points. I also want to look at more of a top 5 finish and top 10 finish. This is important because if I see somebody who's a supreme value, like let's just pretend like Derrick Henry gets ruled out, this week, whoever his backup is, who's very, very cheap, is probably going to get thrusted into a spot where he's going to see a large workload. So that's why I always sort by top 5 and top 10. I want to make sure that I'm not missing a very cheap value somewhere. And in week 1, when no injuries, my guess is we're going to see most mid to high end running backs at the top of this list.
That makes sense.
So, looking at the 20+ percentage, you'll see Bijan Robinson. He's the second most expensive running back behind Jonathan Taylor. He's got a ridiculous ceiling compared to everybody else. Joe Mixon is next, and it's actually a pretty steep drop off you see between this ceiling and Joe Mixon's ceiling. Even when we sort here, it's like, you got Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon. So Bijan Robinson right away is just looking like a supreme play at this salary compared to the rest of the running backs. But when I go and look at that again, maybe there could be somebody who could spell him. But Joe Mixon, Kamara, Aaron Jones, Rachaad White, they're all similarly priced and similarly projected. Then you get to ETN, and then you get to Jonathan Taylor, you get to Devon Achane, and then Ramondre Stevenson. When I go and look at the top 5 finish, it's Bijan, Mixon, Kamara, Jones, Taylor, but Rachaad White has arguably the same chance to finish in the top 5, and he's significantly cheaper. So right away, what I'm taking from this, Alicia, is if I'm paying up, it's for Bijan Robinson, and I'm not paying for Jonathan Taylor.
Right. And putting White in. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And now with ownership, too, when I sort by ownership, you'll see it's kind of what we expected. Those mid-range running backs are dominating this right now, and half of them seem like they're kind of good chalk. Like if I go and look at this, 20x percentage of the highest on running backs, Joe Mixon was second overall, and he's the second highest on quarterback. I'm making a note that Joe Mixon's probably good chalk here. Yep. Raheem Mostert, he didn't pop really before, and he's got some pretty high ownership. His 20x percentage is very low, and he's 6,400. He's probably out of consideration for me. Devon Achane could be, 16.1. You don't love to see that, but that's okay. Then you have James Cook, who's probably not there for me this week. He's in a high total game, so if you want to make him part of a stack, I get it, but not really. Rachaad White is the guy who really jumps out at me here along with Kamara. 20%, 20 plus, 23%, 20 plus. They're in the same pricing tier as these guys, except they're even a little bit less owned. And also Ken Walker pops here too. 10% on Ken Walker, 6,100, decent chance, less than a 50% chance to get in the top 10. Ken Walker's interesting. DeAndre Swift, no thanks. Travis Etienne, no thanks. Zach Moss, no thanks. And then obviously Jonathan Taylor, I don't really want. But Bijan Robinson looks like a pretty damn good value here. And you're getting an ownership discount. So let me pull up DraftKings because the solver's being a little finicky right now.
And when you talk about ownership while you're pulling up DraftKings,
sure.
How close to a slate should you build just to kind of make sure you've got everything in on time? And can you build the night before? Do you build, the morning of? Does it have to be 30 minutes right before a slate?
It's a good question. So for football, it's really best to try and have an idea of what you're going to build before Sunday comes. And then when you get the Sunday inactives and you get a list of, who's in, who's out, you can make adjustments as need be. But that's what makes football a really great sport, unlike a daily sport like baseball or basketball, where something can change in a heartbeat. You essentially have an entire week to really think about what you want to do. Me personally, I start looking into what I'm going to build Friday, puts together some builds on Saturday, and then Sunday I'm mostly tweaking. And if I feel really, really good about something, or maybe I feel like there's an edge I can exploit, I'm going to enter some more contests so I can try and get up and try and, gain as many plus EV dollars as I can. So I'm going to switch to DraftKings really quick. So first, let's put in the running backs that we said we really, really were high on. And to go back to them here at the 20 plus, let's start with Joe Mixon, and we'll do Joe Mixon and Bijan first. So we'll do Bijan, Joe Mixon. So now I have a chalk running back and I have a much lesser owned running back that are both projected really well. Now we'll start to go look at the wide receivers. So the wide receivers. Sorry, I had Minnesota in here for the video. Sorry for the article I just did. Okay. Let's get the full slate run. All right. So the wide receivers. Alicia, this is probably going to be the most pivotal part of this entire video, is when you're selecting the right wide receivers that you want to put into your single entry contest. What I want everybody to understand about wide receivers is that they essentially are your hitters in baseball. I know that there's a floor projected and a ceiling projection, but essentially all wide receivers have a floor of 0. They need a quarterback to throw them the ball in order for them to accrue fantasy points. So it's you want to value these a little bit differently than you would the running backs. You're looking for straight ceiling and out of wide receivers. If they're cheap, you're looking for a good median projection. But really, you really want to look at the ceilings here. And here's when you can start using things like the 3X column and the 4X column. One thing that I always want to preach to everybody, and this is when, you're building, if you are picking a wide receiver that is not in your stack, so I want to make that very clear. If this wide receiver is not in your stack or a bring back in the same game, and they are highly owned, you should actively look to find a way to pivot off them, unless there's no other viable pivots in the area and you have to play them. So I just want to make that clear, because just to give everybody
understand the why there.
Sure. So if I'm taking on a wide receiver that is not part of my stack or a bring back, and I'm playing a well-projected stack, there's a chance that parts of my stack are already higher owned. I'm already eating higher owned running backs because they're a little bit more stable. So in order for you to take a one-off wide receiver, if they're very chalky, it has to be because they have an expectation that no one else can meet at their salary. Here's what I mean, and I'll give you a real-life example of this. So when I go and look at, these wide receivers by ceiling, Tyreek Hill by a quarter mile is the highest owned wide receiver in this range, right? Like it's not even close. 14 compared to Lamb at 1, Jefferson 4.5, and Chase at 7. But when you go look at the ceiling, you have a guy in CeeDee Lamb who's more expensive, but the ceiling is relatively the same, and he's a fraction of the ownership. Justin Jefferson is cheaper and has a 1 point less median projection, ceiling of about 2 points less, but his ownership is at 4.5%, right? So that's incredibly low. And then Jamar Chase, too. Jamar Chase, kind of similar. I mean, he's a little bit less of a value than these guys, but when you sort by ceiling, it's pretty impressive to see how Lamb, Jefferson are pretty close to Tyreek here. When I look at it by salary, it shows the same thing, and you see that, Tyreek Hill, is he the best value here? Yes, but do you need to play him? No, because this ownership, this projection difference and ownership difference, you're gaining a lot more by maybe taking a Tyreek fade based upon the rest of your lineup. So that's a really good way to illustrate what I'm saying, is if you have that ownership there and you could find a pivot, unless they're in your stack or in the same game, you should probably find a pivot or try to at least. And if you can't, then you just got to eat it. And I know most people are not going to love that, but it's true. Wide receivers too, there's a bunch on every team. So I like to look at the top 10 finish here, and I like to sort that. Hill, Lamb, Jefferson, Chase, London. See, look at this. You see how Drake London and Malik Neighbors are in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're in like the top 6 or 7 players to finish in the top 10. And 6,000, 5,900. Right away, I'm thinking these guys are both extreme values. Like, I'm already thinking that. I'm like, man, that's a good place for me to start. And also, if you remember, when we looked at the overall range of outcomes here, sorted by 3X, they were telling you mid-range wide receiver is really the way to go. So you see how that kind of comes back to the overall ranges now. Our thoughts are confirmed. We should probably be paying down at wide receivers if we can. And what I mean by down, I don't mean dumpster dive, but more mid-range. You keep going, you'll see Devontae Adams. He seems overpriced. Michael Pittman sees a tad overpriced. Nico Collins is right about where he should be. Marvin Harrison's right about where he should be. Jalen Waddle appears to be a little cheap. Terry McLaurin seems to be a little cheap. So that's a way that you can look at it. If I sort by 4X, this is usually where you see really cheap wide receivers. Rome Odunze popped in the overalls. Drake London is the second most likely wide receiver on the entire slate to 4X's salary, and he's 6K. Then there's Brian Thomas, and then there's Malik Neighbors, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin. I probably want to live in this range a little bit. So let me go in now, and let's just throw in Drake London for argument's sake, and we'll throw in... We go back to the range of outcomes, and let's throw in, we'll throw in Terry McLaurin too. So go to Terry McLaurin. So right now I have these positions filled. Let's go back to our stacks now. So we identified the stacks as, these are the quarterbacks we want to get: Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Trevor Lawrence, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Sam Darnold. So based upon our salary here that we have already constructed, do you think we should probably pay up a quarterback? Do you think we should go mid-range, or should we pay down?
I'd probably go mid-range, actually.
Yeah, I agree. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So let's take Kyler Murray. Right, we'll use him as an example. We have Kyler Murray. So now with Kyler Murray, who are the people we want to stack him with? We already know that we saw that Marvin Harrison Jr. looks like a pretty decent value. So let's go grab him in 200. He's a lot more expensive than I thought he was. I think James might have his pricing wrong there.
Yeah, he's a little bit expensive.
Yeah, James has his, actually, no, he's got his pricing right.
Okay.
Yep, he's got it right. So, but we looked at him as like an okay value. But if you're going to stack Kyler Murray, you probably want him. But here's where we can go figure that out now. So we have this tab here, which is called our Stack Finder. And this is a really cool tab where you can pick the teams that you want to isolate, and you can go and grab their stack. So we'll use Kyler Murray as an example here first, where we're going to use Arizona. We'll do a QB +2. You can do a QB +1 also. Personally, just so you know, Alicia, when I start running on the solver, when we get that fixed for the next video, we'll take a look at that. When I'm running on the solver, I will never force a QB +2. If it gives it to me, great, but I never force it. But I want to demonstrate the point here. So right away, you can see that Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, this is the best projected stack at the ownership that you will get. Kind of expensive though, right? 19,700. When I sort by salary, you'll even see here that if you were to go Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, Zay Jones, even though it's more expensive than Marvin Harrison and Michael Wilson, the Michael Wilson side's the better projected one. So let's take a look at the QB1. Yup, Marvin Harrison, not even close. Like that's the guy you should be stacking Kyler Murray with. So we're going to leave him in there. So now this is where we're at. And we start to say to ourselves, okay, we have 3,500 left. We need to punt, tight end, or flex, and we need a DST. This is going to go against a lot of conventional thinking. I like to put in the lowest priced defense that I can find just to see what my most extreme options are. Now we have 4,000 for tight end and a flex 4,000 each. I'm going to go back to the range of outcomes. I'm going to go to tight ends. The reason why I'm saving tight ends for last, so it's a proven statistic that most tight ends, that even at the top end tight ends, their overall fantasy production and difference between lower level tight ends. So I think it's something crazy like the projection between wide receiver 1 in fantasy and wide receiver 7, 8, 9, 10 in fantasy is so much greater than tight end 1 versus like tight end 30. So your tight ends, I kind of want to play who fits with this build. We kind of have to do that. Here with tight ends, I'm going to treat them more like the wide receivers, but you'll see naturally 6,100, that's a good median. But these 5,500s, the 58s, they're not really great values in general, just tight ends. This is maybe where people try to pivot and get a really cheap guy. You have Theo Johnson here at 2,500, 14.7. Kyle Pitts at 4,600. That's a decent value. You have Evan Ingram, Trey McBride, and then Zach Ertz. So the sheets are really insinuating that if you're playing a one-off, not in your stack, you either want to pay really down for Theo Johnson or Zach Ertz, or you can go mid-range with Kyle Pitts or pay up for Ingram and McBride. So based upon our lineup construction here right now, I'm going to go Zach Ertz first, just because he's really cheap. Theo Johnson, I don't even know if he's going to get any run for the Giants, so I want to be as realistic as possible. That leaves us 4,500. 4,500. Here, you'll see. Now we have to go to the range of outcomes. We're going to go back to our overall. We're going to isolate by salary. And we're going to scroll down to 4,500. And we're going to see if there's anybody that pops here as a value. Brock Bowers, 9.5, okay. Rashid Shaheed, that's a really, really good value at 4,400. Jaleel McLaughlin, Darnell Mooney, maybe, yeah. Overall, though, you're going down. You see Roma Dunze. Okay, maybe it's Roma Dunze. That could work too. So let's put in first. We'll put in Rashid Shaheed. We have $100 left. Maybe you want to get off Carolina as a defense. You can go up to Washington. Maybe you want to instead play Adunze. Play Adunze here. That gives you 500 now. You can go off from the Panthers to a better defense. Maybe you want to go to the Chargers against the Raiders or the Raiders vice versa. So that right there, if you're going to go for a Kyler Murray style build, is kind of where you can get to in single entry. You have a very cheap, very chalk running back in Joe Mixon. You have a highly projected pivot running back in Bijan Robinson. You have Kyler Murray, who's one of the more screaming values of the slate, so he's going to get some ownership. You have Drake London, who's a projected mid-range wide receiver. He's going to get some ownership. McLaurin's not going to be chalk. Harrison's going to be a natural pivot with, natural pairing with Kyler Murray. And then you also have Zach Ertz. And Adunze, maybe a popular value, but we'll see. So, with this lineup, Alicia, do you think this is one that we can enter into a contest?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious when it comes to, should you bring somebody back from the Buffalo game, or are we thinking that Arizona and Buffalo is going to be a high-scoring game? And if so...
No, you're 100% on the money. That's exactly where I was going to go. So right now I'm seeing that, if I go and look back at the range of outcomes and I want to look at team stack and team totals, I see that Buffalo is tied for the highest team total on the slate. Maybe I want to get a piece of that game. I go and look here and I can look at James Cook, and yeah, he's not a screaming value, but maybe that's the piece I could find, right? When I go look at wide receiver and I go and isolate Buffalo, Khalil Shakir, I guess you can call him a value. Curtis Samuel, I guess you can call him a value, but we called him a fringe guy earlier. They're not projecting as well as you would think for that game environment. So maybe the play is to let's move off Bijan. Let's play James Cook, and then we have 900 to upgrade. So maybe if you want to upgrade here, maybe you want to get off McLaurin or Ertz because they're both on the same team and you're not playing their quarterback. And that can give you Brock Bowers, who is popping as a value as a tight end.
Yeah.
So that's one way you could do it. Here's also another way you could do this, though. And I'm being long-winded because I want to demonstrate all the points and the flexibility that everybody has. And this one lineup here you have here, what is the number one change you can make to make this a pretty correlated stack?
Would you put another Arizona player?
You could do that. Here's another easy one. Remember, Jaden Daniels was one of our favorite quarterbacks that we liked and was a supreme value.
Oh yeah, cost-wise, yeah.
Yeah, you put him in there. All of a sudden now you get a double stack of Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz. You have James Cook, Joe Mixon. So you're getting, chalkier. These are both going to be chalk running backs. That's okay. You have Drake London in a very high, good spot. McLaurin, Marvin Harrison, and Adunze. Now my mind's starting to go to, what if I want to move off of Marvin Harrison and then I can go get Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, perfect.
In a stack like that. So
I feel comfortable with that lineup.
Yeah, me too. I feel better about this than I did with the Arizona one.
Yeah.
So that's a way you can do it. And you could also mix and match any way you want to. If you want to go Justin Jefferson because he's going to be much less, owned, you can. Then you want to move off of, Adunze for Shaheed, or you want to move off the Raiders and go to like the Dolphins or the Browns, like, the Bills. You could do all that. That's how I would game plan single entry. If I'm not using the optimizer, I want to show everybody the optimizer, but the projections are not loaded. So we'll revisit. But there is two more tools I want to show everybody. So I built this out. I confirmed my thoughts. I said, actually, these aren't my confirmed thoughts, but these are the thoughts that, hey, this is a lineup I'm comfortable playing. We have this other tab, another tool. It's called the Pivot Finder. This Pivot Finder is really cool because I can grab anybody, any player at any salary, and I can see if there's a worthwhile pivot without me having to scroll through all of the different tabs. So one thing that I think this is very valuable for is your flexes and also your super, super chalk players. So if I'm looking at just like the biggest chalk players, I'm seeing Achane, Joe Mixon, Mostert. This is perfect. Let's go. I'm going to use Achane as an example here. Devon Achane. We're going to put him in here to create the comparisons. Acceptable salary range. I like to leave it within 300, sometimes 200. The median range, I like to expand this a little bit more just in case there is like a supreme value that maybe I'm missing. And specific positions, you can say, hey, I want to pivot off him at running back only. I can do it with wide receiver. I can do it with tight end. For this purpose, though, let's just see if we can find a running back we could pivot off of, too. So right here, you're going to see that Devon Achane, 6,800. He's right here in the middle. He has the fourth lowest ceiling of anybody in a comparable salary range. And he's also going to be the highest owned. Right away, I'm thinking that outside of James Cook in a vacuum, like everybody here's a better play than Devon Achane. Right away, I'm thinking that if I have, a chalkier stack and already one chalky running back, maybe I'm eating a value wide receiver, you probably don't want to play Achane there. If I'm playing like a Sam Darnold stack, maybe you do want to play some Devon Achane there. So that's the way to look at it. From a one-off perspective, though, yeah, it looks like Joe Mixon showing positive leverage, even at his salary. Aaron Jones, looks like a really, really strong pivot too. And he's even cheaper than Mixon. He's going to be 5% owned. And then you have Alvin Kamara, who's, right around there, will be 10% owned and showing his positive leverage. And James Cook is probably somebody you wouldn't go to in this scenario. So any questions on like the pivot finder and how to use that?
No, I think it's definitely helpful to be able to use that as opposed to, I know a lot of times myself, I've let the optimizer kind of build for me, and I haven't looked at tools like this to really kind of dig in and to feel out what comparable players look like with different percentages. So
100%. And it's interesting to note here too, is that when he shows you this leverage, it's also giving you the score of like how these players are leveraged against these. So if you're running a 150 max set, you may say, all right, the optimizer's giving me, 30% Devon Achane and 15% Aaron Jones. Maybe I want to flip those. Maybe I want to make them even. So that's the way you could start to look at that. The last tool I want to show everybody, and then Alicia, I want to answer any questions we may have. We have this tab here. These are our contest sims. These are very powerful and they're very valuable. It's very important to know that these contest sims, you can pick the slate you want to use, main, secondary, Thursday through Monday. If you want to use a showdown, you can click user. DraftKings, FanDuel. Are you uploading a portfolio? I don't really deal with this that much because I use James's projections. The contest size you're simulating and how sharp is the field. So
talk about the field, how sharp is the field, when you would use that, which contest?
100%. So that's actually this tab right here is what I'm going to use to illustrate it. So let's say we're playing the 150K spy. There's 1,600 or so, 1,700 people, entry field of entry fee of $100. Right away, if I'm going and building for this slate, I'm going to be using that contest, I'm going to note that it's a small field. In NFL, unlike any other sports, the smaller field contests are usually still, much bigger than the daily ones you would play in NBA, MLB, so I want everybody to know that I consider anything around like 2,000 or less in NFL, I consider small. The jury may be a little out on that. I know James considers small to be anything from 0.25 to, maybe 1,000 in NFL. Ultimately, I don't think small or medium is going to really make a big difference for what the projections we're going to get here. What I actually think is more important is how sharp is the field. So not very, I would call anything that's a free contest 25 cents. Anything up to about the $12 single entry or $15 3-entry max, I would consider that not very sharp. Anything that's about maybe $20 to about $50, I would consider average. The reason why I do that is there's the $50 single entry that people like to play every week. There are some contests that you can mass multi-enter at like $33 a clip. I believe there's a $33 5-entry max that DraftKings likes to run, and I believe that there's a I think there might even be a $44 one. I'm not sure, but I like to consider those average because you could still MME at a higher dollar amount. You're going to find sharper players in there. And then anything above above $50, I consider very. If somebody is able to, drop multiple entries at, $75 a pop, they got to be pretty sure that they're a good player, right? Like, so I consider that very. So for this purpose, I'm going to run on small and very for the double spy. And then I'll illustrate what everything here means. Any day now, contest sims. Should be done in a minute. Okay, cool. We're done. So, this first thing, the first thing I want to explain to everybody up here, these sections with these lineups, they're going to show you the salary, the projection, the total collective ownership, a fantasy score, a GPP projection. It's also going to show you how many times that lineup won a contest and about 5,000 simulations. You should never use this field to build your lineups. These are not suggesting that these are the lineups you play. This is simply suggesting that these players are showing up in winning lineups. And you'll see that down here with overall exposures. So here you'll have a salary, you have a projected ownership, you have an exposure, and then you have an edge. Projected ownership is what they project to be in these types of contests. The exposure is how much they're showing up in these contests, meaning in winning lineups, how often they're prevalent. And an edge is just their exposure minus their projected ownership. How often are these people showing up? So right away, when I look at overalls, I see Rachaad White, Ken Walker. Those are two running backs that we identified earlier. Roma Dunze as a major value. And then there's Joe Mixon here at 6,600. So you're starting to see that these are the top four here. These are running back, Alvin Kamara here too. But these players are all within percentage points of each other. This is maybe where if the salaries align or the positions align, maybe you make a pivot. So like the first thing I'm already thinking of is maybe I want to pivot off of, James Cook for maybe Rachaad White or Ken Walker. That's like an example of something I would take from that. When I look at quarterback exposure, look at this. Sam Darnold, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, Trevor Lawrence. So this is actually saying that the ideal strategy in smaller field, high dollar contests is to probably pay down at quarterback, which means that your stacking options are going to be pretty interesting with that. But yeah, Darnold, Richardson, and we landed on Jaden Daniels, right? So we were right on the money there.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't use that build from above, being that?
Yeah, because it's not perfectly stacked, and it's never really that as correlated as you would think it is.
Got it.
Like just to give you an example here, like the third most prevalent, the third highest projected lineup that won, it's Trevor Lawrence, and he's got nobody there with him, right? Like if Trevor Lawrence is the top scoring quarterback, he definitely has a wide receiver, a tight end that benefited. So that's why. But yeah, you'll see here though that Trevor Lawrence, Daniels, Richardson, Darnold, Kyler's next, but pretty steep drop off after those four to Kyler. So automatically I'm thinking mid-range or pay down at quarterback. So we were on the money going with Jaden Daniels. Running back exposure. We have Rachaad White, Ken Walker, Joe Mixon, Kamara, Achane, James Cook. So here's what I would take from this. You get a pretty big edge if you take on Rachaad White. Same thing with Ken Walker. Mixon is very high owned, but you're already getting the edge with him. You should not pivot off Joe Mixon. That is not the answer here. However, James Cook, who's only seeing like a 1% boost based upon his ownership, he's still a good play. He's not over-owned in this contest. Can you maybe find a pivot that's better? Yeah, maybe you go to Alvin Kamara. So now going back to this one, let's rebuild this really quick so you can see in real time how I'm doing it. McLaurin, we went Zach Ertz, we had Tyreek Hill, we had Joe Mixon, we had James Cook, we had in the flex. We were working with the Panthers just to. Oh no, sorry, we had Vegas. We had the Raiders here. And who did we have as our value wide receiver? Do we have a Dunze? Did we play a Dunze?
We did.
We did have a Dunze. Okay. And then 6,100, Drake London. Drake London was the last guy. So right here, this is the lineup we had. Now I'm thinking like, man, Cook may be a little bit more volatile chalk than I think. Maybe I want to go and just pivot to Kamara here. Maybe I want to go and then pivot to Rashad White, who I believe is going to still be owned. Yeah, Rashad White's still owned.
Yeah.
So that's why we're running backs. I say too, and now you're really seeing this point, why I never want to just fade the chalk just to fade it. Like there has to be a reason, and you're still gaining an edge by taking these chalky guys. So now let's just say we go with this, and we're we're going to go Mixon and we're going to go Rashad White. Now it's also the natural bring back now with Washington. So now you have the game stack here.
Yep.
And now you have this extra 700. Let's see if we can do something with it. So when we go to wide receivers, we have Roma Dunze, who's popping the most. So you probably don't want to fade him there. You have Tank Dell. You have Christian Kirk. Yep. These are all paid down or mid-range wide receivers, just like we thought the value would be, where we thought it would be. Here's what's kind of interesting, and this is something I don't think most people know. When you look at this, and I sorted this by salary, Tyreek Hill is the highest exposed high dollar wide receiver, but he's a little over-owned. He only shows up 11.5% of the time, and he's getting 15.5% ownership. Justin Jefferson shows up 1.5% of the time less than Tyreek Hill, and he's a third is owned. That's an easy pivot for me. You don't have to eat that Tyreek Hill chalk. Now I have 1,000 left. Maybe I want to, go from the Raiders to, the Bengals that are going to play a really, really bad, Pats offense, right? That feels like a pretty good single entry lineup now where you have a value QB who most people like, who I think is going to have a little bit more ownership, chalk running back with a good edge, chalk running back with a good edge, natural pairing, big pivot off of the highest owned player on the entire slate, a kind of popular value. He's in your stack, and decently popular, I'd say mid-range value. So that's how you would use the contest sims to build it. And if you want to take a look at tight ends, you can too, where you'll see Kyle Pitts, McBride, Ingram. But honestly, I don't care much about this if I'm double stacking. If I'm not double stacking, I might care more. But you'll see, like our guy from Washington, Ertz, doesn't even make this list. It's because nobody's probably double stacking Jaden Daniels. And a good way to actually see this too, even in wide receivers, the only Washington receiver you're going to see is Diami Brown, and he doesn't even project for that much. So actually what I'm thinking now is maybe Jaden Daniels is going to be very low owned. I think as we get closer to lock though, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday comes, I think you might see a little bit more ownership. But if that's the case, and you think that Jaden Daniels is going to be so low owned, then maybe you go back to Tyreek Hill, and then you go to we'll go to the Seahawks against Denver, right? Like those are the only little pivots you need to make in single entry.
Okay.
But yeah, so that is how I would build a single entry slate, small field. That's how I would do it, and I'm here for any questions you have.
Perfect. That was helpful. Thank you.
Of course. So I know we want to get the optimizer back online. I'll talk to James about that. Anything else you want to discuss before we get out of here?
No, I think that's good for today.
Awesome, Alicia. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited for this year. We're going to be doing a lot more of these, and let's hope we get a big win for week 1 this week.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Likewise, Alicia. Likewise. I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.